Right, back to another video. 2022 is finally over, and it surpassed 2020 as the worst year in history for various reasons. My previous computer died. The Russians invaded Ukraine. The Azerbaijanis attacked Armenia again. Mr. Enter did and said stupider shit that he did in 2020. Elon Musk fucked up Twitter beyond belief. I was stalked and antagonized nonstop by various subhumans. And the worst thing that happened to me personally was the loss of my mom. Fuck 2022, and it sucked worse than 2020. On a side note, there are some good things that happened in 2022. I got a new computer and a new phone. I got a raise at work. I more than doubled my CD collection in the span of a year. Germany, Canada, and the Czech Republic selected the F-35 for their air forces. Artemis 1 finally launched after numerous delays. I got to revisit some old PC games from my childhood. My Chemical Romance released their first new song in nearly a decade. And that fascist fucknugget known as former Pope Benedict XVI bit the dust. On a side note, we got a lot of albums and EPs that were released last year. Today's video is my ranking for the best albums and EPs of 2022. I initially thought about combining everything into one list. I later considered making a separate video for the albums and another for the EPs. In the end, I decided to make this one video with two separate lists, one for the albums and one for the EPs. There were hundreds of records released last year, and I managed to get a hold of a few dozen of them. The first list is going to be the top 22 best albums of 2022. There are a few rules to this list. First of all, the albums must have been released in 2022. The second rule, studio, live, and compilation albums are eligible. The third rule, the remix and greatest hits albums are being excluded, and I didn't get a hold of any that were released last year. Fourth, if I don't have the album, that I can't include on the list. On a side note, unofficial bootlegs are also being excluded. Just as a disclaimer, this does not reflect the opinions of anyone else. It is only my personal opinion. Now, on with the list. Number 22, The Red Wings of Destiny by Ugly Kid Joe. This is the first album by Ugly Kid Joe in 7 years. However, it doesn't sound as heavy as its predecessors. It's still a good album regardless. I'll set this aside for now. And number 21, Other Worlds by The Pretty Reckless. It's the first compilation album by The Pretty Reckless and is a collection of B-sides and rarities from their studio albums. I'd like to thank my grandparents for getting this for Christmas. The main reason why I wanted this album in my collection is because I like The Pretty Reckless. And it saves me the trouble of having to track down the Japanese versions of their studio albums just so I could hear those B-sides. And number 20, The End So Far by Slipknot. Now, this may not be the best album by Slipknot, but it is their last album released on Roadrunner Records before going independent. Supposedly they have a lost album that they want to release sometime. Loudwire said it's probably going to be released this year, but we'll have to wait and see. Number 19, Pawns and Kings by Alter Bridge. I actually started listening to Alter Bridge last year, and I consider them to be a heavier version of Creed. Their new album, Pawns and Kings, is a great album, and one of the best that 2022 gave us. Number 18, Divisive by Disturbed. This is the first studio album from Disturbed since 2018. We're working with a new producer this time around. On top of that, this is the heaviest album from Disturbed. I'll go into further detail about this album when I review it. Number 17, Omens by Lamb of God. This was a last-minute addition to the list because I almost forgot to add it. This album is badass, and I really wish I had known about the Japanese version prior to pre-ordering this album. Number 16, Requiem by Korn. It's been almost a year since this album was released. Korn are working with a new producer this time by the name of Chris Collier. It's also the shortest Korn album and their first album released on Loma Vista Recordings, the same label that Rise Against, Grey Days, and Ghost are with. Number 15, Live to Win by Motorhead. This compilation was released on my mom's birthday and contains unreleased tracks as well as solo songs by Lemmy. It also has some songs from bands that Lemmy was with, which I think is pretty awesome. Number 14, Zeit by Rammstein. Of course, I had to include this album on the list because I like Rammstein's music. Even though I don't speak German, I really like this album regardless. Maybe someday I'll actually learn German so I can understand the lyrics more easily. Number 13, And Stuff by Psychostick. It's a collection of B-sides, rarities, covers, mashups, and other cool shit that Psychostick recorded over the years. And I predicted that they would do this at some point. Maybe someday they'll release another compilation album. Rob Kersey actually talked about this album when my dad interviewed him in March of last year. If you want to hear my full thoughts on this album, I'll include a link to my review in the description. Now, number 12, Free LSD by Off. It's the first studio album that Off released in 8 years. Just like their previous albums, it was self-produced. It's fair to say that they knocked it out of the park with this album. Not to mention the fact it's also their longest album to date. Number 11, Return of the Dream Canteen by Red Hot Chili Peppers. This is one of 2 studio albums that Red Hot Chili Peppers released last year. It's a very good album. If only UPS wasn't so fucking lazy and actually got it here earlier so I could listen to it. Or at least so I can listen to it earlier than I did. Number 10, The Generation of Danger by Talla. When I reviewed this album, I mentioned that Talla went a heavier direction with some experimentation. So much so that some songs touched upon avant-garde metal, not just nu metal and metalcore. I'm including a link to my review in the description in case you want to hear my full thoughts regarding this album. Number 9, Live in Studio Nashville by William Duvall. This is the new solo album by William Duvall. When I reviewed this album, I said that I found it to be even better than William's first solo album. If you want to hear my full thoughts, there is a link to my review in the description. Number 8, Painted Shield 2 by Painted Shield. The second studio album by Painted Shield. When I reviewed it, I found it to be an improvement over their first album. Speaking of which, I'm including a link to my review in the description. Number 7, The Phoenix by Grey Days. What sets this apart from the previous album by Grey Days is that less people were involved. I even commented on one of the band's Facebook posts a link to my review, and they thanked me for it. I'm including a link to my review in the description of this video. Number 6, Doggerel by Pixies. The funny thing is I almost forgot to put this on the list. Pixies are a very influential band, and some of my favorite bands, including Weezer, Alice in Chains, Bush, and Nirvana, were influenced by them. After listening to this album the first time, I said that it was one of the best albums by Pixies, as well as one of the best albums of the year. Number 5, Direction of the Heart by Simple Minds. It's another amazing album by Simple Minds. Of course, my copy took a while to get here because it was shipped directly from the UK. Also, the song Vision Thing sold me on this. Number 4, Planet Zero by Shinedown. A friend of mine loved that I got this album in my collection. Someone at work even told me that this album is tight, and I agree. It's also one of the best albums by Shinedown. My favorite song from this album is No Sleep Tonight. The album itself is phenomenal. I noticed that a lot of Shinedown's newer material is more poppy sounding compared to their previous work, and this album is no exception. Number 3, The Art of Survival by Bush. The second time Bush worked with our good friends Tyler Bates and Eric Ron. as well as the second Bush album to be distributed by BMG Rights Management. It's also the heaviest album by Bush, and even topped The Kingdom in terms of heaviness. I'm including a link to my review in the description in case you want to hear my full thoughts. Number 2, Unlimited Love by Red Hot Chili Peppers. This is the first of 2 studio albums by Red Hot Chili Peppers that were released last year. In their first time working with Rick Rubin in over a decade. It wasn't until sometime after I got this album I learned that the Japanese version has a bonus track. Here's hoping that the band will release a compilation with B-sides and rarities at some point. This is it. My number 1 pick for the best album of 2022 is Earthling by Eddie Vedder. It's the first solo album by Eddie Vedder in over a decade. Even before I started working on this list, I knew that this would be number 1 for me. Gavin Rossdale really thinks that's a terrible idea for singers of bands to do solo work. Terrible idea, my ass. I'm going to be reviewing Eddie's solo work at some point, so stay tuned for that. And those are my picks for the best albums of 2022. I know that I excluded the new albums by Ozzy and Ghost, but the reason why I didn't put those albums on the list is because I don't have them. Now for the best EPs. The same rules apply except this is for the EPs. That being said, these are my picks for the top 8 best EPs of 2022. Number 8, Seasons Winter by Weezer. This is the 4th and final part of Weezer's season series of EPs. And even though this is my least favorite of those EPs, I still think it's a great EP overall. Number 7, Nowhere Generation 2 by Rise Against. This is essentially the leftovers from the album Nowhere Generation. I mentioned this in my review, and I'm including a link to the review in the description. Number 6, Seasons Spring by Weezer. This is the first Seasons EP by Weezer. It's interesting that Weezer decided to touch upon folk rock this time around, but it still retains much of the signature of pop rock and power pop sound. Number 5, Portals by Kirk Hammett. This is Kirk's solo EP, and I think it's really awesome that it was released on Blackened Recordings, which you all know is Metallica's record label. I believe Kirk is going to be doing more solo work, and we'll have to wait and see. I'm also including a link to my review in the description. Number 4, Permanent Radiant by Crosses. This is the first record by Crosses in 8 years. They did release 4 singles that didn't make it onto the EP. I kind of wish they did include those on this. Maybe someday those will be released on a compilation album of B-sides and rarities, but only time will tell. Number 3, Seasons Autumn by Weezer. This is the 3rd in Weezer's season series of EPs. It's interesting that they incorporate elements of dance rock this time around. As an added bonus, the music video for What Happens After You was released on my birthday last year. Number 2, Seasons Summer by Weezer. This is Weezer's 2nd season's EP, and the one that I think is the best, which is ironic because summer is my least favorite season. Funnily enough, I mistakenly ordered 2 copies of this EP, so I decided to give one of them to my dad as a Christmas gift. And this is it. My number 1 pick for the best EP of 2022 is Conspiranoid by Primus. This is the first record by Primus in half a decade. Not only does it touch upon experimental rock, it even ventures into progressive rock. This isn't the first time Primus touched upon progressive rock. The song Conspiranoia sold me on this, and it shows that Primus are still awesome. And that does it for the best albums and EPs of 2022. I know that not everyone is going to agree with me, but what can you do? There's going to be more albums coming next year, including a new album by Metallica. You know damn well I'm going to review that. I think The Cure and Slipknot also have new albums coming this year. Now is the part where I question you. What are your thoughts on my picks of the best albums and EPs of 2022? What are your picks, the best albums and EPs out 2022? What albums are you looking forward to most in 2023? Let me know in the comments. If you like the video, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Be sure to press the notification bell to notify future videos. Thanks for watching, and I'll be back soon with another video.